where they do the good instinctively, they've really hit that pinnacle of excellence. They've really hit that, you could say, that standard of what it is to be a human being, right? You're performing your task well. You're doing your job well as a human being when you pursue the good and do the right actions instinctively. Okay, so what I have on the screen here is a list of the moral virtues. I know in the text it talks about a couple of these, but I wanted to give you the whole list of the moral virtues that Aristotle talks about. And he spends a good period of time, or a good length of time, in his Nicomachean Ethics going through these moral virtues and developing the ideas behind them. But we'll just take a couple of them here and see if we can get the big idea of what he's talking about with these moral virtues. Recall from the previous slide that Aristotle said that virtue is a mean between two extremes. And what he means by a mean is that it's the middle ground between two different extremes. And he thinks in order to develop virtue, virtue will be almost surrounded, right, by excess and deficiency. Okay, so you have virtue as the middle ground, and on the left side of the screen are a list of vices that represent excess, going over the top. On the right side of the screen are vices that represent a defect. So something is lacking in the characteristics on the right side of the screen. So we'll take the first one, courage. Aristotle thinks that courage is a mean between the extremes of recklessness and cowardice. Okay, so let's break that down. What does he mean? Courage, he thinks, is the proper disposition with respect to the passions of fear and confidence. The greatest object of fear, he writes, is death. Courage is the virtue that pertains to fear of death. So what does that mean? Let's illustrate it with an example here. Let's say that a person is in battle, right? They're in war. If that person were just to charge the enemy, not thinking about their own safety, their own good, or the good of their fellow soldiers, but just charge the enemy, disregarding strategy or anything like that. Aristotle doesn't think that person would be courageous. He would say that person is stupid. Okay? I mean, there's something wrong with this person. They have too much, they really have too much confidence, right? And they're just reckless. They charge the enemy. Well, a person who acts that way is probably going to end up dying very quickly in the battle. In contrast, the person who, when facing battle, runs away from the battle, that person, Aristotle would say, is lacking something, right? They're lacking courage, right? They're governed too much by fear. And we would call that cowardice. So cowardice would be the defect of courage. Right? It's not courage, it's lacking something. And what it's lacking is that ability to face death, or the potential death, your potential death, and not be afraid to stand and fight. Whereas the reckless person, they're just given over to excess, that they have way too much. bravado, and they charge into battle and probably die a quick death. So courage is the virtue because it's the mean, it's the middle ground between these two vices. What about moderation? Number 2. Aristotle says that moderation is the virtue pertaining to the bodily pleasures. Moderation will involve the restraint of the desires with a view to our own health or good condition. Since moderation is associated with one's good condition, we can say, it leads to our bodily well-being and preservation rather than our harm and destruction. Too much would be, or excess would be, licentiousness. It would be the person who is completely given over to bodily pleasure. Someone who all they want is food, drink, and sex. That, for Aristotle, would be a vice. On the flip side, a lack of moderation would be insensibility. Someone who completely abstains from all bodily pleasures, whether food, drink, or sex. And it's interesting that the bodily pleasures aren't considered a bad to Aristotle. I mean, obviously, we need food, drink, and sex in order to survive. If it weren't for those bodily pleasures, none of us would be here. Thus, we can conclude that there's nothing in and of itself that's good or bad about the bodily pleasures, but it's how we use them. I mean, it's how we react to them. So too much wine will give one a hangover. Right? A couple glasses with your meal can actually be good for your health. But if you drink 2 bottles with your meal every night, I mean, that could cause serious health problems, if not in the short term, definitely in the long term. Okay. Number 3, liberality. Liberality is the virtue pertaining to money. Money is something that's very important, and for Aristotle, there's a virtue pertaining to it. The liberal person, or the person who is generous, we could say, with their money, Aristotle thinks that that person displays a lack of concern for their own good, and in particular, their own economic welfare. The idea behind that is that it belongs to the virtues more to act well than to fare well. And one of the great noble deeds is being able to give. The liberal person, then, we can say, is not a lover of money. Because obviously if they love that money, I mean, they wouldn't give it away. But they have to have a little bit of money in order to give it away. Okay, so think of someone who's generous with their money. Okay, now the excess of that, the vice, would be prodigality. Someone who is completely, someone who just takes no care for their economic wealth whatsoever and just gives away, spends, out of control, everything that they got. Well, that person, or gives away everything that they got, I should say. Aristotle would say that that person is, right, not very smart. I mean, why would you just blow your money giving it away to whomever for whatever? Okay, that's liberality is about giving the right amount of money at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason. It's not about just giving it to whoever asked for it for whatever reason at whatever time. On the contrary, stinginess would be the defect of liberality. So the stingy person is someone with money, but who hoards their own money, who just keeps it for themselves, who has no regard for their fellow human beings and the suffering that they could be enduring. So, liberality, again, is that middle ground between the extreme of prodigality and the extreme of stinginess. 4. Magnificence. Interestingly, this virtue also pertains to money.